Hello, everyone. I'm really happy to be on this amazing stage for the second year. And I really like the name of my talk, but I wasn't the author of it. It was kind of assigned to me, because first I was going to speak about Apollo client state management only. Now I have more alternatives. And the second reason why I like the topic is when you're a speaker and when you're rehearsing on your slides, you rarely pay attention to the first one. It's just a title, right? You just skip it. And like 15 minutes before my talk, I found a typo on the first slide. It looked like this. And I bet this would be the most controversial and confusing topic for the whole conference. Especially considering the fact I'm in the core team, I would be probably kicked like immediately. As Divya mentioned, my name is Natalia, and I'm core team member. I mostly care about documentation, but I'm also a big fan of Vue Apollo. I'm a Google developer expert in web technologies, and I work at GitLab. But before we start considering different alternatives to Vuex, let's answer one important question. This question is very frequently asked on different chats, forums, even on DMs. Do I need a shared state at all? When I need Vuex, actually. There is a famous quote by Dan Abramov saying that Flux libraries are like glasses. You know when you need them. As you probably recognize, I wear glasses. And I can say this analogy is slightly flawed, because sometimes your sight is like worsened, but you still think, OK, I'm fine, maybe I'm just tired, I don't need glasses, I don't want to wear them, and this happens to applications as well. Sometimes people invent really weird architectures with like lots of event buses or like storing everything in the root component, passing probes down. And on the other hand, sometimes you don't need glasses, but you just wear them for style, right? This happens to Vuex as well, because I've seen landing pages with Vuex. For some reason, there were no interactivity there, but Vuex was there. So let's define at least a few reasons when you actually need a shared state. And first, and the most obvious, if you have independent components requiring the same data with them. It might be also different routes. If you have a router in your application, there are high chances different routes will need the same data. And it's a good place to start with a shared state. Or you have some really, really deep nesting, and you don't want to pass all the probes down like 10 levels. OK, now let's go to some options that are available in Vue 3 mostly. And first of them is provide inject approach. You might say, well, provide inject was there for years. And I believe this pattern is really undervalued, probably because in documentation it's placed in handled edge cases, which is not really fair to provide inject. And I promise that in Vue 3 docs, we already get it out of there. It will be more wide. So provide inject, basically, what is it? If we have a component tree, we can provide some data in the root component, and then we can inject this data in any component which is child of the root in the component tree. We don't need to pass it all the way. And this was great for dependency injections. Lots of plugins even provide inject. But there is one trick. These data are not reactive. So even if we put some kind of state in the root component, we cannot change this data, so there will be no reaction. Luckily, in Vue 3, we have a reactive helper, as well as a Vue Composition API plugin, and it's also known in Vue 2.6 as Vue Observable. So we can simply create a reactive object, name it state. We can provide it somewhere, even in the root component when we create an application. And then we can inject it somewhere in the component. And then if we change the state object, all the changes will be reflected in children components, which is really great. But as any simple pattern, it has a caveat. It's really, really tempting to start mutating the state where it's injected. Because it's so simple, right? It's right in the component data. Let's just mutate it here, and everything's going to be fine. it's kind of breaking the idea of one-way data flow. So please, if you do this, if you follow this pattern, never, ever, ever mutate the state where it's injected. It will be on the docs as well. Now let's move to something more advanced than this simple pattern. There were many talks about Composition API yesterday. And of course, Composition API is really powerful, and it could be used for state management as well. And now I didn't do this myself because we have Eduardo, who created an amazing library named Piña. Eduardo, if you're in the audience, wave. OK, you all missed true baffles anyway for the mention. Oh, you're here. So this is really nice implementation using Composition API that allows you to manage an application state. And it also is visible in DevTools. Let's take a look on how it's implemented. So you can create a store with a create store helper. This is imported from Piña. You will have a state. And it's actually very similar to what Vuex has, right? You can have a state with some characters, and you have actions where you mutate this. And after this, when I have a setup function in your component, you can simply use main store you just created. And then you do something that is really similar to mapping state and actions in Vuex. You just return your properties as main properties. OK, let's take a look on the application. And yes, this is Rick and Morty. I will just make it a bit bigger. And here we have some favorites. So kind of a shared state. They're here. They're displayed here as well. And let's take a look at the implementation. Is it visible? OK. So actually, it's what I shown on the slide. Piña has really intuitive interface, so you don't need to dive into it, really. Here we create some state where we have characters, favorite characters. And we have some actions when get characters is just fetching something from the API using Axios. When we store characters and we set an error if something went wrong. Probably it could go wrong right now. And also, we setting is loading. Same for add to favorites and remove from favorites. So no magic here. Let's take a look at the component. And here we have a setup function. You probably all are familiar now from the Composition API, where we use main store, and we return everything from this store. Let's take a look at DevTools, because, well, if you're a Google developer expert in web technology, this means Google actually confirms you know how to use Chrome DevTools. So let's see if I qualify for this. See, here this laughter. This is Google developer expert sitting there. So they know I'm saying the truth. So let's go to characters. OK, not to characters. Let's go to actually Vuex tab. It's really funny because Piña is using Vuex tab. Well, I'm saying we don't use Vuex, but we kind of do. So let's add something here and load the state. As you can see, state is displaying like you have it on Vuex. You can see how characters are changed. Load state again. Unfortunately, there is no payload here, not displaying so far, but I believe it will be changed. If not, it's on Eduardo, not on me. But I think this approach is really nice and simple. And maybe next Vuex will be implemented something like this one. OK. Now let's go to the hype train. And let's speak a bit about GraphQL implementation. Who here is using GraphQL in their applications? OK, this is quite a lot. So one of the most frequent questions when you use GraphQL, especially with Apollo client, is how to combine Apollo client, Vue Apollo, and Vuex. Because how do I store my data? In fact, you can still use Apollo client with Vuex, but this means limiting a library. You will disable the cache, you will do weird things, and in fact, you don't need Vuex if you want to store your local state with Apollo. So first of all, one more shout out. This time it will be for Guillaume, who is author of Vue Apollo integration. Guillaume, are you here? OK. Anyway, it's like second pack of stroopwafels. Being speaker really profitable here. So how do we store the data fetched from the API if we use Vuex? We dispatch an action. This action usually triggers an API call directly or via service, whatever. After this, we check if it was successful. Yes. Then commit mutation for success. Wasn't successful? Commit another mutation. And after this, state is changed, which looks like a bit boilerplate, but well, this is fine. And in fact, this is really fine because you have great control on every single step. Still, it feels a bit annoying to perform this operation for every single REST API call. Could it be somehow different on non-Flux architecture? Well, yes. With Apollo client, you have a query, you have a success and error state and state change, and I have this green frame there because this part is performed automatically. You are not doing anything manually to store the results to the actual local store. It's done for you by Apollo client. OK, this is for REST API calls, for GraphQL API calls. But what about local state? What if we're not calling an API? Local state with Apollo client is represented by Apollo cache. Well, everything in Apollo client is stored to Apollo cache. If you fetch something from the API, it's stored to Apollo cache automatically. And local data put to Apollo cache as well. So this is how normal GraphQL query looks like. Normal, I mean this query will go to GraphQL API endpoint. We just want to fetch favorite characters, and we define some fields we want to fetch. What's the difference with a local query? In fact, it's like 7 characters. We just add client directive, and this query won't go to the API. It will just try to fetch data from Apollo cache, and that's it. And where do we have favorite characters? We need to put them to this local cache, right? Because we need to somehow initiate it. And we do this when we create an Apollo client with write data. It's like an initial state in Vuex. You just put whatever you want to the cache with write data. Now we have an empty array, and we can play with it. We can change it. We can add more favorite characters. But how? So for changing data in the local Apollo cache, we use the same method as for changing data on the GraphQL endpoint. We send a mutation. But this time, we don't send it to the API. We send it to the local cache. And of course, we need to somehow resolve this mutation. We need to explain our client what are we doing. And we will do this like reading the cache, updating data, writing them back to the cache. Sounds interesting, nothing probably understandable, but let's try to take a look at the code. So I go back to my ID, we'll switch a branch to Apollo GraphQL, and we'll restart the server because, as you can see, it's failing immediately. I mean, live coding in front of 1,000 people, what could go wrong? OK. Now we have our server running. Probably we don't. Ooh, my internet is disconnected. And I have like 0 hotspots shown. OK, I will try to, while it's trying to connect back, let's try to take a look at the code. So here in the setup, we're fetching some data. And if you already use Vue Apollo, and you look at this and like, what the hell, where is my familiar Vue Apollo code? Where is Apollo property? This is Vue Apollo version 4, already using Composition API. Because I mean, Composition API is a hot topic. I couldn't just skip it. So here we're actually trying right now to fetch some characters from Rick and Morty API. And we use query which is a method from Vue Apollo. And we have results exposed and loading state. We have an internal loading state right now. After this, we just exposing what do we want from characters, and that's it. We're not storing it anywhere. It's already in the Apollo cache. So, OK, fine, but where are favorite characters? Yes, this is a placeholder. Don't look at this. So let's try to create a query to actually fetch some favorite characters. The query itself already exists here. As you can see, it's completely the same I've shown on the slide with the client directive. Let's check the internet. Ooh. See? Nice. We have no images, but we have an images. Magic. So let's try to use this query right now to fetch favorite characters from our local cache. So we will have some result. I will name it just fef. Result naming is not my strong thing. And we don't need any loading state because we're fetching from the local state. It will be just use query, favorites query. And it's completely the same as we had here, unless the query is a bit different. Now we can change this placeholder to actual thing. We are passing character. This is just a method. And we will check if fav result, not this, is fav result value. And please notice a value here because fav result is a ref. That's why we need to check the value. Favorite characters includes a character. OK. Trust me, nothing is going to change right now when I click the button, because we still didn't write the resolvers for our mutations. So let's do this and see if I failed here. So we have two mutations, one to add characters to the store and one to delete. But here in the client, we have the empty resolvers array. Why do we need resolvers for mutations? It's the same case when you need to write and describe what mutation in Vuex does with a state. When you click the button, trigger an action, commit a mutation, what's going to change on the state? It has a bit more fancy syntax, but nothing really complicated. So we are going to write a resolver for add to favorites. And here we have three parameters. We really don't need first one. This is like parent context. This is a past parameter, which is a character. And here we have an access to the Apollo cache. And as I already said, first step, we are reading the cache. Is cache, read query. Second one, we actually change the data. We add in a new character here. And then we need to write this new data back to the Apollo cache. And I completely messed the syntax here because I need to pass a query. Here we have the same query. And we pass data. Awesome. Let's go back to the browser, fetch them again. And as you can see, it works. And as I'm expert in DevTools, let's go here again, because Apollo has its own DevTools. So we can simply check what's in the cache right now and what in the favorite characters as well. And if you wonder if we can track mutations like we do with Vuex, yes, we can. And the only thing we need right now is actually to remove some characters from here, because as you can see, mutation is triggered. Nothing is happening because we need a resolver as well. So one more, it's remove from favorites. And we will have almost the same set of parameters, but we are passing ID, not a character. And again, I will use the power of copy-pasting here. But we are not pushing, we will be actually filtering. And we are filtering by ID. ID is just not equal to ID. And I forgot to mention that Apollo client is really forcing immutability right now. They actually require you, not require, but they really encourage you to make all the cache updates like we do here immutable. But this will take another 10 minutes to do this properly if you're not using the library, so I will just push and filter right now. So let's check. I don't have favorite characters. No, I do. OK, one more loading state. I know, it's so exciting watching spinners. OK, let's add some. Let's remove some. OK, this is working. So, oh, thank you. And this was actually everything I wanted to say about Apollo client really quickly. I'm still in time. And if you wonder like how it all works in depth, I have a repository with all these examples with a few branches, so you can just play with it. And thank you one more time.